The situation in Ireland around about that particular time was absolutely dreadful.
The Irish were discriminated, Irish Catholics were really discriminated against.
Then came the disaster of the potato plot.
So they lined up at European ports to come to America. The fare was $1.50 per person to climb aboard that big ship.
And one of the items that they had to bring before they were allowed on board was a bed. Also a casket or a coffin.
Thousands of Irish came to New Orleans, here at the base of Adele Street in what is now known as the Irish Channel. People getting off boats knowing nothing about the country, if they even got here. You look at one ship record, 119 passengers, 26 of them died en route. And those who survived lived in ramshackle boarding houses in what became known as the Irish Channel of New Orleans. Why would people who were basically farmers live in the squalor of the city? No money, for one thing.
And of course, in the slave-owning South, they could not work anybody else's land because slaves did that.
So they worked as laborers, building canals, building railroads, and building hatred and prejudice.
They would work at any semi-skilled or unskilled job or virtually any obtainable wage. And thus they became prime targets for jealousy by Native American laborers whose jobs they stole.
And in one case, the Irish willingness to work in any conditions at any wage sent 9,000 Irish to their graves in New Orleans. This is what most of us think of when we distinguish present-day Irish here in Louisiana, the happy celebration of St. Patrick's Day. But when someone like this Baton Rouge woman goes back to Ireland to see how it all began, it becomes a story of hurt, a hurt in America's melting pot.
The Irish are probably the most discriminated against, disadvantaged, persecuted Caucasian immigrant group we've had.
The immigration of Irish began to pick up in 1821 after the first potato famine in Ireland. They were allowed to board these big ships for only $1.50. Why so cheap? Once cotton bales from New Orleans were unloaded in Europe, the ships were too light and needed ballast. The Irish were the ballast. And look who they were. Brennan, James, 30-year-old farmer, destination New Orleans. Fahey, James, 1-year-old. He died on the overcrowded ship.
I walk through this city a stranger in a land I can never call home.
Ship records show that 28-year-old laborer Pat Laughlin made it to New Orleans, but look what happened to the Mahan family. They all died at sea, except for Lawrence Mahan. Death at sea for the Irish steerage passengers was routine, and the death of the children prompted a strange custom.
If a child died at sea and the family arrived at New Orleans and say in later a year or two they had another child, they named that child, the new child, the same name as the one that died at sea.
And once off the ship in New Orleans, about the only work for the Irish was pick and shovel. That led to massive death at what is now a New Orleans landmark. To most of us, Basin Street has a musical connection, but the street was named in the late 1830s after a huge ship-turning basin built on the edge of downtown New Orleans by Irish laborers. They also dug what was called the Basin Canal all the way to Lake Pontchartrain. With picks and shovels, almost no heavy equipment, 9,000 Irish died of injuries or disease, mostly disease. And if an Irish laborer died there on the job, his widow was paid benefits by the Philadelphia contractor. She got 50 cents for half a day's work. And their bodies, many were left in the west bank of the Basin Canal, and others lowered into mass graves here at New Orleans St. Patrick's Cemetery No. 1.
I see by your gravestone you are only 19.
Looking at the graves in the St. Patrick's Cemetery alongside an expressway in New Orleans, it's striking how young the Irish of the 1800s were when they died. The average age appears to be about 30. In New Orleans' Irish Channel today, you can order a pizza for a few bucks, but on these same streets 150 years ago, you were a candidate for starvation if you were Irish.
These were people with a purpose. Their purpose to again reunite their families. And so they, in my opinion, operated in a sort of silly mode.
Silly mode?
Yeah, they put their own lives at risk.
If it weren't 9,000 Irish dying in construction of the Basin Canal in the 1830s, it was the Irish dying in the Civil War. Who were the first candidates for the jobs at the front lines as cannon fodder? An unusually high percentage of Louisiana Irish.
Perhaps they got that because that was all of the job they could handle. You know, perhaps they were uneducated.
A lot of people got the impression the only Irish were poor Irish. That's not really true at all. There was a wealthy section of Irish in New Orleans, what some people call lace curtain Irish, that lived around here, around Lafayette Square. And the designer of that building back there, it served as City Hall in New Orleans till 1957. It was designed in 1845 by James Gallier, an Irishman. In fact, as early as 1769, the commanding general in New Orleans was Alexander O'Reilly. He was brought to Louisiana to crush a Creole rebellion. There was an Irish mayor, Augustine McCarty, in 1815. And by the late 1800s, a look at photographs of businesses of the day showed the Irish had fought themselves out of the lower classes. There was a new underclass. When several Italians were found not guilty of assassinating Irish Police Chief David Hennessy in 1899, a mob broke into the jail and lynched him. A new group was at the bottom of the white social ladder.
To some extent, Italian immigrants in Louisiana in the late 1890s, early 19th century, were very ill-treated. In fact, official Louisiana publications at the turn of the century referred to Italians as Dagos. Officially as Dagos.
You know, this Atlanta-based Irish group is making its first appearance at the St. Patrick's Day Parade here in Savannah.
That's right, Savannah, Georgia. This year, Savannah expects 500,000 people for the annual St. Pat's Parade. That's 5 times the population of the city. Why so big in Savannah? Well, in the 1800s, when captains of the big sailing ships were told New Orleans was full of Irish, they'd stop off at other southern ports like Savannah. If you look at a map from 1770 of Baton Rouge, listing the names of landowners, you see no Irish names at all. Who were the first Irish in Baton Rouge? Well, curiously enough, in 1792, when the Spanish ran our city, they needed somebody who spoke English and could keep them in touch with the local populace. So they brought in some Irish priests. In 1792, they brought in Father Charles Burke. He built a church here on what is now the site of St. Joseph Cathedral. And to keep his Spanish bosses happy, he called himself not Father Charles Burke, but Father Carlos Burke. Since then, a long list of public figures have become Baton Rouge community leaders. Sheriff Brian Clemens, Fire Chief Bob Bogan Sr., often a parade marshal at local St. Pat's parades. But all these Irish celebrations in Baton Rouge halted in the 10 years prior to 1963. One man who was there at the time explains part of the reason.
Well, the Irish, as you know, Joe, they've always been an argumentative group, and they like to fuss and fight.
Stand up for one like you.
But the fussin' and fightin' has come to an end in the Baton Rouge Irish Club. And a group of people whose ancestors were viewed on the same social scale as slaves are getting ready to celebrate.
When I
The Irish eyes don't seem to smile much in one old-time bar in the New Orleans Irish Channel. These are the Irish who have tried to hang on in a neighborhood that has gone down. Gone down so steadily that even the old Irish church is on hard financial times.
Are changed tremendously. It's mostly young people moved in and the older people moved out.
But with the back-breaking work the Irish endured in the 1800s, building canals, stoking the riverboats, building railroads, their Catholic upbringing kept the family unit together. That meant education was a big priority, as this classroom photograph from the 1880s shows. And soon the Irish, who claimed luminaries such as Andrew Jackson as one of their own, slowly moved to acceptance in the more elegant elements of New Orleans society. And something else began to happen.
Not all the Irish that came into the port of New Orleans remained here.
The Irish followed the railroads. They came in really as construction workers, most of them. Like I say, they dug canals and came with the railroads.
And came up the Mississippi River to Baton Rouge. How Irish is Baton Rouge? Well, it may be just a matter of fate, but the town was discovered by Pierre Lemoyne Sieur d'Iberville when he found the Red Stick, after which our city is named, here on the Mississippi River. And the date? Tuesday, March 17th, 1699. He found us on St. Patrick's Day. And Irish-born immigrants are still coming to Baton Rouge. LSU Chancellor Sean McGlynn says there are as many as 6 native Irish in high positions at LSU.
Even on this campus, which is a long way removed from Ireland, we seem to have some little mark that we've made.
Does the name look familiar? Hibernia Bank derives its name from the old Hibernia Societies. Societies first set up by Louisiana Irish in 1818 to look out for their interests. After the miserable 6-week ride to New Orleans on crowded cotton ships, the Irish felt they needed some organization to look out for their interests in Louisiana. And as they got off the boats here on the Mississippi River at the base of what is now the Irish Channel, there were thousands of rip-off artists just waiting for one way or another to take money from the people. Also, madams from the houses of prostitution in New Orleans came down to pick up girls as future employees. That finally stopped after several months. 2 Irish cops, O'Sullivan and McCarthy, stood on the platform right here and made sure that the madams stayed away. But the strongest society the Irish had to protect their interests was the church. In 1830, they built their first church on Camp Street in New Orleans, St. Patrick's. Why build here when Catholics already had the magnificent St. Louis Cathedral?
All the masses and all the devotions were carried out in French, Spanish, or Latin. And so they wanted a place where God spoke English.
George Sells, WAFB 9 News.
Thank you for checking out the WAFB YouTube channel. Subscribe now for more videos and live event coverage. And don't forget to download the WAFB News app on your phone for the local news and information you can depend on.